Hello everybody. This is a complimentary lecture that I'm adding to the Internet Programming and Internet Computing class. The content of this lecture will be optional for the undergraduate sections and the undergraduate students in the undergraduate section of the class. The topics that we learn are going to be, however, very useful. We are starting to learn about how to process dynamic data, or rather data that we can gather through several data server controls that the ASP.NET provides us. And again, these are server-side processes. The example that I will be working on in this lecture is going to be creating a directory for your website. And then I'll talk a little bit about the needs for it and how it works, and then I'll show you how we can implement it. Again, as I said, the undergraduate section, this is optional. However, it's going to be very useful if you learn the techniques and the topics that we talk about today. For the graduate section, you guys will need to kind of work a little bit on these kinds of things in your final project. Now, what we are going to do today is we are going to use what is called the grid view. It's a data server control, and it basically pulls up the information from a data source that is hosted on your server. It could be a database, or in this simple example, it's basically the name or the directory information of your server path, and I'll show you how you can get that information in and then work it into your website. I was debating a little bit about what application to show you and to work so that it would be easy for everybody to work with this kind of process and with this kind of server control without having the necessary needs of understanding what databases are and so on and so forth. The best setting to see the full potentials of data server controls in your ASP.NET is, of course, if you have a database. But at least in this lecture, I'm not going to presume or rely on any prior database experiences. We will just create our own data source, and then we're going to use this data source in our example. One of the examples is a website that I have here, and the area of the site that we will be working on implementing is going to be this directory view. Basically, the table that lists out the name of, for example, files that I have here in my website, and I pulled out just the C# files, as you see, and I'm showing information about them, like, for example, the file size, the last time that they were written, and the name of that file. And if I click on and notice that the file name is clickable, it's basically a hyperlink, but when I click on it, it's going to attempt to access that resource. So we're going to recreate this view, and what we're going to work is basically the directory information as a data source in our website, and then grid view. This table is called grid view. One of the things that you need to notice here is that, see this table, it's basically like a very basic, simple HTML table. However, the most important difference between this table and a straight out HTTP or even an ASP table server control is that it's not static. This information comes from programmatically from a data source, and the data source is the list of my files on the directory where I'm pointing to. And if I erase some of these files, the next time I refresh my page here, it's going to delete those from the list. So basically, it's going to populate this table, which in terms of its server control is called a grid view, because it's a grid view of the data source. And then I'll have the ability to show what parts of this this data source I would like to show and to interact with. So to do this, I'm going to create an empty website, and then we're going to work on creating this grid view into that website and integrating it. So let's see how are we going to do this. First off, we need to create a website. And as you have been working with the ASP websites, for our purpose, it's going to be a local website. So it's going to be hosted on the local host. And so your visual web developer will take care of acting as a web server for you and serving this website through your local host server. So first we're going to go on under the File, New, and then I'm going to click on New Website. And then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to make sure that the Visual C# is selected as my source. And then I'll click on the empty website, and then I'll name this website. So for this case, I'm going to call it Directory Website. Okay, as you see, and you have expected, you've got your website under your Solution Explorer, and then you've got your web config. One of the things I want you to basically from this point on keep an eye on is your web config. Web.config is a file that your ASP server will basically look for and then will read information from to configure your website. And there's a whole bunch of different tags that you can use in your web config to configure your website. This basically looks pretty much like XML, as you see. So under the configuration and system.web, you see there is a compilation tag. And the compilation tag basically allows you to either run your website under the debug mode or as a release version, and then target a certain kind of framework. If you're using Visual Studio 2012, your target framework is 4.5. So what I would like you to do from this point on when you submit your projects, make sure that this target framework is 4.0. So if your target framework says 4.5, just go open your web config and change it to 4.0 so that I will be able to run your website. It's not a big deal though, because if on my system I see the compatibility issue, I'll just basically open up your web config and change your framework from 4.5 to 4.0. So that's one file you can notice that comes with any ASP file or any ASP site that you set up. So I'm going to close this file. Now, next I would like to create my default web form. So right-click and add new item, and then under the new item I make sure that I have a web form selected, and I'm going to leave the name as default and place the code in a separate file. It's my code behind file, and I'm not going to use the master page. Depending on when you're watching this video, you may have already studied the master pages or may not. I'm not going to use and rely on master pages and designing of your website, because at this point we're just interested in implementing a data control so that you'll be able to use it in any content and under any context. So we're going to create a just default empty page that's not using any that's using any master page. So here what I have is basically I have my form, my web form, and then just a basic empty website. So let's run this website in the browser. So as you see here, my website default.aspx is being delivered from my local host on port 51264, and so it's an empty website, so there's nothing in here to work with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and create an h1 tag, and I'm going to call it list of files, and then I'm going to add a horizontal rule, and then I'm going to save my file and refresh my page. So here's how my page looks like. I'm going to have a list of files, and then underneath it's basically empty. Now let's go back to our program, and then we need to set up our data source. And so how are we going to do the setting up of the data source? Now, if I go and open up my the location on the server where my file is set up, I will be able to see it in my Windows Explorer, basically, or the what you call it, the directory window, all the contents of my file. So what I would need to do is to set up this directory info as a source of data, so that I will be able to access it and work with it. Now, to do that, we need to, since it's a process that's going to happen on the server, we need to go and implement it within our code behind file, or our C# code. So what you have here in your C# file, which is basically the page, a class, a page class that controls the workings of your default web form on the server. You've got a bunch of namespaces that are added. Now, to be able to access our namespace, or rather the contents, file contents, we would have to add the system.io namespace. So what we're going to do, which makes our work easy when we are writing our site, I'm going to just add the keyword using system.io. System.io basically takes care of all the input-output classes in your server. So with that, you would be able to set up the directory information. So what I need to do is now the project that I wanted to create is basically a list of all the files within a certain folder on the server that I'm going to use. To be able to get access to the directory information, I would have to create an object from the directory info class, which is a class from your system.io namespace. So we're going to create a directory info class, and I'm going to call this dir info, and it's going to be basically, I'm going to create a new class, and a new instance of this class. And then when I'm creating the new instance, I need to populate it with the path on my server where I would like to initialize the directory info, or rather the directory information. So to type in the path, I would basically use a property of the server. It's called map path. So you basically type server.map_path, and then at this point I'm just going to leave this string as empty. And if you leave it as empty, it would be the local directory where physically the default .asp page is located. And if we look at here, where it is actually on my machine, is in the C folder. It's basically C, my documents, Visual Studio 2010, websites, backslash directory website, which is where I created my project, and then that's basically the location where I'm pulling the or I'm mapping from the server. If you wanted to point to the root of the website, you basically type in the tilde/, or if you wanted to point into a certain directory, for example my files directory, you'd basically type in my files / I don't know, another subdirectory / and whatever directory you wanted to do. So basically this is the equivalent of where you basically have point to for your universal resource locators or URLs. Now, after typing this information in, and of course you notice that I put this object instance into the page_load method of my website. And as you remember from the page cycle, when a page is being accessed from a client, a request is sent to the server, and then the server initiates a set of life cycles for the page, and one of those cycles is load, basically, or rather preload, and then the load section, and so on and so forth. So the page load is essentially one of the first methods that is called when a page is being requested from a ASP server. And so what happens when I request this page, for example, in the browser, when I type in default.aspx and then or rather http www.uhb.edu/default.aspx, the page underscore load method of this default aspx C# is going to be executed to the server. Now at this point, as you notice here, nothing will happen because the page load basically creates an object of the directory info class called direct info, and then it populates that direct info or dir info object with the mapping of the root folder of my, or the current folder of my resource on the site. So now this site is basically my local host and the main folder of that website on the local host, which is called directory website, that I created here. This is going to be populated there. Now let's actually show you what this directory server.map_path actually owns. To do that, I'm going to go to the ASPX website here, and then I'm going to create a label. Now the easiest way to do that is to drag and drop the label button. And then I call this map path name as the ID of this. And then I'm going to leave this text blank. And then I'm going to go to the website here, to the C# page. And then I'm going to call map path name dot text. And then I'll call the directory info. And then I convert that information to string. Now let's run our site. So when we run the default site, what's going to happen is that page load will be invoked, and then the directory info object is going to be created, and then I'm going to populate the content of the directory info into the label called map path name. And so here you see what happened. On the website, if you notice up here, the name of the website, if you remember, was the web server was localhost. It was on a port. The name of the website was directory website, and then the file that I'm pointing to is default.aspx. So as you notice here, the name of my website is directory website, and then the name of the page is default. However, see, when you look at the path on the server, it's actually on my C drive on the users directory, my name, documents, Visual Studio 2010, websites, directory website. That's the physical location. That's what the map path will do for you. That takes the physical location of your directory on the server, as opposed to the virtual location, or rather the logical location of your server. So at this point, it's great. We have the path where we want to read the directory information from, and then populate our web content with the directory list of all the items on that directory on the server. And I'm going to show you next how to do that. Alright, now we get to the meat of the matter. We get to implement our dynamically changed view, which we call a grid view, which essentially acts as a table that populates the names of the files that are in my directory that I just showed you here. The directory C users blah blah blah, and then show the list of those files here. Now to do that, I need to work and create the list of files. So just to make it look a little bit nicer, I'm going to create an H2, and I'm going to call this files on the server, okay? And then this is how it's going to look like. And then I'm going to populate this with my grid view. Now, I'm going to show you just a default grid view, populate the grid view, and show you all the things that go into it as a part of binding your dynamic data at runtime on your server into the view, and then we're going to customize it and make it look nice. So the key here is to scroll down under your toolbox to the data controls. Data controls are essentially server controls that act on data on the server. You can create charts, If you have an access database, you can create an access data source. You can create data lists, pages, views, details view, form view, grid view, and so on and so forth. What we're going to use actually is what is called a grid view. You can learn about the grid view and what it does from your textbook. Now, point out in the further reading sections the section of the textbook that talks about these data server controls. A grid view essentially is a tabular view of your data on your server, or essentially the contents of the data source. And you can do certain things. For example, if you wanted to make a part of a data source into a hyperlink that you could click and access, or if you wanted to edit the content of a source. For example, if you're looking at a student table that has student names, their phone numbers, their addresses, you can put them in a grid view, and then for each individual student, you can edit them, you can delete them, you can insert new student names, and so on and so forth. So grid view is one of the easiest controls to work with. It doesn't really give you a whole lot of functionality. So it lists everybody in a tabular format, and then you can see all of the data contents side by side. I'm going to change this grid view name, or ID rather, from just grid view 1. I call it my files grid view. And when you run your page, you would not see any difference. The reason is, on our page, we have a functionality. We have an object, the directory info object that I created in the page load method. When the page is loaded, I get the mapping of the path of that web page on my server, and then I put it in a variable, rather, in an object. And then also on the page I have a grid view, but there's no connection between my grid view, or rather the view of my data source, to the data source itself. If you look at the grid view properties, so I'm clicking on my grid view, and then on the grid view properties section of my my Visual Web Developer, you see a whole bunch of properties that are associated with it. And one of these properties is basically the data source property. So the data source property, as you see here, is empty. That is what links my grid view to the data source that I have. If I go to my C# code, my data source that I would like to use is the directory info, or the path where I would like to pull file names out, and then use that path into or that information as a data source for my grid view. So as a part of my page load process, I can programmatically assign a data source to my grid view. Remember, the name of the grid view here was called files grid view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and create essentially a data source for my grid view object, and then I will populate this data source with the files that I will pull up from my directory info. So I'm going to call up the directory info object, and then from the methods that I have, I can call up the get files method that basically would get the files within that directory and then puts that information into my data source. Now, at this point, let's suppose that we want to get all files. So we're going to type in as a string in the get files method *.star. That's basically all files with any extension. We are basically pulling that information, and then next step is to bind the data to my grid view. So files grid view dot data bind is the method that performs this binding function to us. So now something interesting will happen. Now if I go and run my file, voila! Now under the files on the server, the view that you see here, this table is my grid view. And I apologize, a part of this table was basically going out of the view, and I'll try to make it a little bit smaller so everybody can see the contents of this web page. Alright, so this is now what my grid view does. or rather populates. When page load function starts, the object directory info is created and is going to be mapped to the path where the file is, the default.aspx file, and then all of the files within that directory are going to be put as a data source of my grid view, and that data is going to be bound to the grid view. On the page itself, the default ASP, I have the server controlled grid view, which is I named files grid view, and this server control acts as a dynamic table now. And as you see in the dynamic table, it shows me all the information that comes from each file. When I run that get file method on the directory info, it gives me the name of the file, its length, the directory name of the file, whether the file is read-only or not, whether the file exists or not, the full name of the file, the extension of the file, creation time, universal time, last access time, universal time, last write time, and last write time, universal time. So this is just perfect. All the information that I need, I get. Now, however, this looks kind of sort of ugly because first off, there's no design with this table. You might want to essentially control the heading of the table, what you want to see. For example, creation time UTC. You might want to just give it a more proper name that's representative. Maybe you want to put like UTC all capitals or whatnot. You might also want to change the data itself. For example, the last write time is full date and full time. You might just want to show just the last date that it was written, or just the time that it was accessed and the time that it was written, and so on and so forth. And of course, you might want to just not show certain fields. For example, you just might not be interested in looking at the file whether it exists or not. So this exists column sort of looks redundant, and you might not want to include that into your website. So next, I'm going to show you how you can create a grid view and then customize it. And the data comes from the same grid view. Before I do that, I'm going to show you that this is truly dynamic. This comes directly from your website, and every time you invoke the page, or you refresh the page, or you request the page from the server, it will show you the exact contents of the folder. To do that, we're going to go here, and in the same directory, we're going to add a new item. And in this new item, we're going to create another web form. And for this, let's call this form about this site. And as a part of creating this this form, it also creates the code behind file. Now let's rerun our page, and voila, the page is refreshed, and now you see the about this site ASPX, about this site ASPX.C#, which is the C# components of it, as well as all the other three sites that you had. It's going to be populated and shown and added to the table. Alright, so let's go to our Visual Web Developer, and I'm going to close the about this site ASPX file that I created, just to show you that this is actually taking the information from the server. And then we're going to go to the design view. So at the bottom of your screen, you see source, split, and design. Click on the design view, and it shows you the design of your website in the design view. Now in the design view, your grid view would look visually, and it shows that it's showing column 0, column 1, column 2. These are essentially the header columns, and then the columns, or rather the fields, the rows that have A, B, C in them, this is showing them as being text, values that are shown as text. And then next to the grid view, you'll see a little greater than sign, and that opens up, if you click on it, opens up the grid view tasks. And then under the tasks, you can apply and perform certain kinds of things. Notice the data source is chosen as none. We'll leave that as none. This leaves my grid view empty so that my page underscore load method, when the page is being loaded on the server, will populate the data source of my grid view, as you remember from the data from the C# file. The data source of grid view is being programmatically created, so there's no need for me to assign a data source at the design time. If you had a database associated and you didn't want to programmatically populate your data source, you would have the option of expanding this, clicking on new data source, and then adding data sources to your grid view or other data controls. You have the option of choosing a format for your grid view, editing its columns, adding new columns to it, and also editing the templates for your grid view. Before we go into any details here, I will create another grid view, and this time I'm going to create this grid view in the design folder. So I'm going to drag in another grid view, and then I'll put it between the files on server tab and the grid view that I already have. And then what I'm going to do is just press a enter. So basically the way that it looks like is that I have my first grid view that I just created right now, and then the files grid view, and then a return between the two in my code behind file. And then on this, I'll call this as nice files grid view to show that there are two different grid views. So and I'm going back to the design view. Now let's click on the nice files grid view, and then look at the auto format for this. By default, your grid view doesn't have any formatting. You can choose certain kinds of formats for your grid view by default, and then or you can basically go under your code view, or rather source view, and customize it. So let's click on classic. It gives us just a basic look that's better than that plain grid view. And at this point, my second grid view that I just created here, my blue grid view, is not essentially bound to the data. So let's first run the page and see how it looks like. You shouldn't see any difference, and of course you don't, except for the little space that I just added. The reason is that my blue grid view is not bound. Let's actually go and change the name of this grid view from the nice files grid view. Let's change it to blue grid view. Okay. Now notice here the code is now much bigger than the basic plain grid view. This is just a formatting. You see the cell padding is 4, foreground color is blue, there's no grid lines, alternative row styles become white, so the background color will become white and dark blue. The edit row style colors different than the footer row style, the header row style, the pager row style, and so on and so forth. So all these style design are being added. Now if you scroll down on the properties of your grid view, you see some of these are changed as a part of adding styles to your grid view. So you have two options: either typing them in the source code, actually 3 options: typing them in the source code, going into your grid view properties and changing the properties of your grid view, style properties of your grid view, or going to the design view and going to auto format and then change the auto format of your grid view to choose a base template for them. So that's one important aspect of it. Now let's go back into our source code and in the code behind file, and let's now bind this second grid view data source as well. Remember, I called it blue grid view, and then I call its data source, make it the directory info.get files. And now this time let's just get all the ASPX files, and then call blue grid view data bind the bind method, to bind the data to it. And then let's run our page. And when you run your page, you see now this this page looks the second file looks actually, or the second grid view looks a little bit more professional. So this is more colorful. The content is still the same. The difference is also that I only bound the ASPX files. Remember when I said directory info.get file star.aspx as opposed to star.star. So my plain grid view has all the files. My blue grid view, which is the one up here, it has just the information for the ASPX files. But the rest of the information is pretty much the same. Let's actually change the alternative background color from white to something like a yellowish look. So let's go in here, and then from alternative, let's call something like beige, and then run our file. Okay, so now the rows will be alternatively blue and beige. And just to show you a little bit more, let's add 2 more ASPX files to our page. So I'm going to go here, add new item, call this author.aspx, and then I'm going to add another one, lists.aspx. I'm bad with thinking of names, so I'm just putting certain names. And so here you have, when I refresh my site, now I have 4 ASPX files, and as you see, the background color alternates between blue and beige, and my header color is dark blue, and so on and so forth. Alright, so now let's go to our file, our code, and in our ASP.x code. Let's go to the design view and expand our blue grid view, and here click on the edit columns, and on the edit columns, it opens up the fields window that you can choose to populate, and you have the available fields that you can create for your grid view. Notice that all the fields here are basically texts. You could have certain different kinds of fields for different kinds of contents that populate that field, and then you would have, for each field, you'd have certain properties for them, and then you'd have your field that are being used, fields that are being used for your current grid view. Notice the checkbox auto generate fields is checked. That is what creates or populates all the fields that come from your database. In this case, or data source. In this case, the list of files. If I uncheck this and click on OK and save my page, go and run my page and refresh the page, my blue grid view is now just goes away. The reason, again, is when you go to the grid view edit columns window, I uncheck the auto generate field. So although the grid view is bound, the data source is bound to the list of files in the code behind file, I'm not generating any fields for it, and therefore the grid view is just basically empty. Although it has data in it, it won't show any of that data. To do that, I would have to create the fields manually, which is what I'm going to show you how to do. Okay, now to add fields manually, you would do 2 things. First, go to design view, expand your tasks, and then go into the edit fields. Then from the available fields options that you have here, you choose the appropriate field and then click on add. And once it's added, you change the properties of that field. The most important one is the source of the field, or rather the name of the key field that you are populating from your data source. In our case, the information for every single file. The first item that I will create here, the first field that I create here, I'm going to create it as a hyperlink field. So click on add the hyperlink field, and then as you see, the hyperlink field, essentially populates up the properties of that field from its accessibility text to its header text, to its behavior, and to its data, as well as styles. Okay, now let's leave this as empty as is, and as you see in the design view, the grid view looks differently, and that's precisely how we want it. And if we run our page, of course the field is created, but the field is empty because we did not associate anything to its data source that is coming from the data source. Basically, all properties of every single file that our data source attributes to. So now let's see what happens when we populate those fields. So let's go and again expand under the edit columns, click on the hyperlink field, and let's go into its header text. And for the header text, I'm going to call it file name. Okay, and of course visually you see now it goes under the header, which is the header of my table there. Now let's run this. Now as you see, file name shows up. One of the things that you might notice, it's actually kind of hard to see, but you will see that 4 stripes, two blue and 2 alternative beige stripes that are empty. This is a good behavior here. It shows that now that field is populated. However, it's populated by empty. There are items there with that field, but we didn't associate any of those items to their appropriate components. To do that, again, we're going to go to the edit column, click on the file name field here, we called it file name, and then we have to go under the data item. Under the data item, it's a hyperlink column, so it gets its text field from a data source. You can also have its format string from it. Then it has a navigation URL format and a navigation URL field. What those mean is the navigation URL field basically gives you where, or essentially is like the href, is the URL where you go to if you click on it. You can click and expand it and then type material in, or you can type your the content there. The data field text field is the text that will be shown as the text of that hyperlink. So remember when you were talking about HTTP hyperlinks, you had the A tag, and then in the A tag you have an href, that's your navigation URL, and then you have the text that you type in so that you can have the two name be different. In this case, we need to point into that content of the field that we are pulling from the database. Now look at here, for each of these files, the name of the file, about this site.aspx, about this site.aspx.c#, author.aspx, all these file names, they're under the content name, which is the data key of that field. So what you're going to have to do is to associate this name with the data field that we are populating in our grid view. So I'm going to type in name for both navigation and the name of the field. All right. Now when I do that, you see in the design view it shows data bound. Now this means that your data source of the grid view is properly linked to the name field of the data source that comes from your directory information.getFiles. Because getFiles gets all the attributes for every single file. And what you're doing is that you're associating the attribute name of each file to the hyperlink field, both name and the URL. In this case, both are the same. You want to see the name of the file, and then you want, once you click on it, you want to access that file exactly as it is spelled. And so here you can do that. And now your field is bound. So now if you run your file, now it shows under the file name for every single file And remember that for the blue grid view, we just pulled out the information for star.aspx, so we're just interested in the aspx file. So the name of the file is being populated here for every row of your table. And when you move your mouse over at the bottom of the page, you see it shows the href or the URL of that file as being the entire link with the name of the file, which is about.aspx. So if I click on it, it's going to open up the about.aspx. If I click on author, it's going to open up the author.aspx. If I click on default, it's going to open up default.aspx, which is the same file anyway. And if I click on lists, it's going to open lists.aspx. Okay, so so this is great. So I populated my first customized field, and so which is great. Now I'm going to just go ahead and add two other fields. I'll add this read-only file, and then the creation time and the access time to my fields. So we're going to go to our design view, add a checkbox field, and then for this field we're going to go to the data, and for the data field I am going to consult the page. It's called is read only. I'm just going to copy it and then paste it into the data field here, and then for the header, I just don't want it to be just is read only as one word. I'll do read only question mark, and then press OK, and we run the page. It says read only. We'll just take the question mark out. I don't like the question mark part of it. I'm going to do that in my source code. So I'm going to open the source code, and then I'm going to change the header text for the read only, and then is read only as a data field, and then the header text is read only attribute. Let's see if I can make this about this site aspx author.aspx and properties, and then read only, apply, OK, and refresh file, and then as you see here, author.aspx is associated as read only. Okay, so now next I'm going just to show you to basically just to add a couple more items to this. For example, the creation time and the last access time, and then and that will be it. And you should know how to basically manipulate data and use data controls. So let's go back to our program. And then let's go again to the design view, and then expand, edit columns, and then let's create a bound field here. And for this bound field, we call it created, and then on the data field, it is the creation time. I'm feeling lazy, so I'm just copying and pasting. And then you can basically have format strings. For example, we could have it as, say, 0D, and that would format our string. Let's see what happens. And of course, the 0D, which is the format string, and you can access the format string from the Microsoft website, or just Google it up. D stands for just a date, and so you can see that it shows that the created date was 7/18/2003. Let's just change this from 0 D to, let's go to the source code, and here let's call this creation time, and then change the header text to date created. Okay, and then so it shows date created. And then I'm going to add the size of the file, and for the file size, what I'm going to show you, instead of going to the design view, I'm going to create it right here in the source code. So we're going to do ASP bound field, and then within the bound field, the data field for it is going to be length, and header text is going to be file size. That's the name I want to give it. Let's see if this works. Of course, data field, not date field. So data field, length, header, text, file size, and now let's run our program. And as you see here, now I have the file size as the header of the fourth column, and for each file, the length of that file in terms of bytes is shown here. Next, I'm going to look for to add another file, and that would be accessed. And I'm going to make that into a time field. So, so I'm going to add another ASP bound field, data field will be last access time. The only thing that I need to be consistent is the data field should be consistent with the name of that field from the data source. The header text is what is going to show on the top row of my column. And here I'm going to make it time accessed. And then I'm going to format it, which will be data format string. And then I can add a certain kind of format string. So I'm going to add a format string that shows the time in minutes, hour, minute, and second. Okay. Now, for this format string, I would like to take the value of the bound field, and then I want to turn it into time. And I'm going to type in capital T. Capital T is the long time format, like 4:36, 55 p.m., a.m., or whatnot. And then when I save this this file, and when I refresh my file, now the last column is the access time, and as you see, for each file, the times are accessed. So the default.aspx, the last time that was accessed, is basically when I created this file, and then all these other files will show the access to last access times on those. This basically concludes our lecture on data server controls. We primarily work with the grid view. The concepts that you learned here in conjunction with your textbook for the reading materials will essentially help you work with data on the server and populate data fields such as a grid view or a forms view or a details view and so on and so forth. The idea is that you would have a data source. The data source would be either a database table, a database view, or a data source that, for example, in our case that we studied today, um, a, um, a directory information from files on the server. What that data source will entail, what would have, is that it's going to be a tabular view, and it's going to have fields, which are, you can think of them as columns, that have a key for each of those fields. It's basically the text that we had here. For example, file name, is read-only, length, exists, full name, extension, creation, time. These are your fields. And then for each item, for each row, they would be populated at runtime on your server. So for example, the default.aspx, which is not read-only, was created on 7/18/2013. It is 2,208 bytes, and last accessed at 2:51 p.m. Are its contents, or its attributes that are bound at the runtime to your data source, and they are now presented in a grid view format. Details view, form view, and all these other data server controls will format and present your data in a different way. I hope that this lecture was helpful to show you how you can work with data on your server, and based off of this, you can think of so many different things that you can have associated with the websites that you create. Alright, well, I hope that you enjoyed this class, and I will talk to you next. Thank you.